listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. If you're a man and your life is lacking real purpose and meaning, you may not know what it is, but you feel deep down that you're here for something more, something bigger, bolder, heartfelt, and soul-led. If you lack the deep intimacy, love, and sex that your heart craves, without the confidence and know-how to create it. If you're struggling with the burden of life and feeling trapped by the lack of freedom. Or if you're feeling isolated, lonely, and lacking the support and mentorship of men who really get you. If you resonated with any of those, then, oh my goodness, we so get you. We really do. You're not alone. And we see this over and over again. That's why we've created Waking the Wild Masculine. It's a potent circle led by Jonathan Wilkinson, and it's there to support you in discovering your soul path and expressing your heart's truth whilst being fully seen and held by a circle of your fellow men. It really is the most powerful activating magic we know of. You can let us know that you're feeling the call by going along to primalhappiness.co/WTWM. I really hope you make this happen for you if it's right for you. And women, we haven't forgotten you. The upcoming Waking the Wild Feminine has sold out, but I have something very exciting for you coming soon. It'll be available in the next couple of days, I think. So if you are thinking you might like something that's, I don't know, a taste of Waking the Wild Feminine, but not the whole deal, keep an eye on our Go Deeper page. That's primalhappiness.co/go deeper. And you'll see something there very soon. And now onto this week's show. It's with Dr. Kristen Race, a best-selling author, head of mindfulness for Solvasa, and the founder of Mindful Life. A renowned world expert in the field of mindfulness, Kristen's programs and services are rooted in neuroscience and designed to build resilience to modern-day stress. In today's show, we spoke about the changing world and how we've ended up as a species dealing with a brand new challenge and probably our biggest one in our history, our relationship to technology and specifically our digital devices. We explored the terrain of today's world, the potentially harmful effects on the brain, the addictive nature of tech, and how you can reclaim your sovereignty and choose to use your mobile device from a conscious place. I actually wasn't expecting to find this show as interesting as I did. So don't worry if you're not into mindfulness or neuroscience. If you're a human who has a phone and is interested in living in a more aligned, wild way, I think you're going to find this a very useful episode. Let's dive in. Hello, Kristen. A huge welcome to the show.
Hello, Leanne. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, I'm happy to have you here. And I also really appreciate you coming straight from hot yoga and allowing me to see you in your post-yoga glory.
Yes, thankfully, the listeners don't have to endure my sweaty hair and ski hat at the moment, but it's a good way to start my day. And so I was grateful to be able to go and get back in time to join you here.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much. So I was saying just as we were chatting, it's kind of blown me away that we've never done, I believe, it could be that someone's going to write to me and say, no, you did do a show back 3 years ago on this topic. I'm fairly sure we've definitely not done a whole episode directly on technology, digital, and how we can manage our lives and digital detox. I'm fairly sure we've never had a show on that, which is kind of when I think about it, how weird. It seems really an obvious thing to do a show on. So I'm really delighted to have you on for us to explore that topic together. So thank you.
Absolutely. I'm excited to explore it as well. It is certainly related to our happiness, our primal happiness. So it makes sense to dive in.
It really does, really does. So what inspired you to do the work you do today? What's your story? What led you here?
Sure. Well, I call myself an entrepreneur by accident. Mm-hmm. And my story begins about 15 years ago when I was working on my dissertation, studying the neuroscience of stress. And at the same time, I had an 18-month-old child. I was pregnant with my second child. I was working full time. I was desperately trying to finish my dissertation before child number 2 was born.
Gosh.
And I was remodeling my house. So life was nuts, to say the least. Mm. And I was able to get through. I just pushed through and charged on. And I finished my dissertation. My son was born, healthy baby boy. But about 3 months after he was born, I just was not recovering from the surgery. I ended up having to have a C-section. And I was fatigued and I had joint pain. I had all these issues going on that went on for over a year. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. Well, long story short, I ended up being diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that was likely triggered by stress. Mm. So despite the fact that during all of it, I thought I could push right through, it caught up to me. And the irony is not lost on me that this all happened while I was studying the neuroscience of stress. Instead of really listening to what I'd been studying, I decided, well, my solution is I'm going to pack up my family. We're going to move out of the bustling city of Denver and we're going to move to the mountains and live happily ever after in a resort town and just watch sunsets and frolic in the wildflowers. And that worked for about 2 weeks. We moved to Steamboat Springs, Colorado, a very small town. And it pretty quickly, I was able to recognize that it didn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter what you do. Those little stressors that we have in our modern lives creep in all kinds of ways. And I was working as a consultant in the schools, and I started experimenting with some of my own mindfulness practices that I had been using to heal my autoimmune disease. I started experimenting with these in the classrooms because I was really concerned about the stress level of kids. Mm. And it was amazing how they responded. And the program just blew up. I was teaching 70 classes a month all over Northwest Colorado.
Wow.
Formalized a curriculum, researched the curriculum. That's that program. Then I started training teachers so they could implement the program to make it more sustainable. And that program grew like crazy all over the United States. At the same time, I wrote a book called Mindful Parenting because I was becoming increasingly aware of that the stress level of these kids was coming directly from the stress level of their parents. Mm-hmm. And so really trying to look at that family system. And then as I started giving talks for book talks around the country, after I would speak with these parent communities and school communities, people would come up and say, can you come to my law firm? Can you come to my accounting firm? Can you come to my medical practice? We really need this. Mm. And it just sort of blew up organically and has grown from there. I now work with businesses. I work with medical professionals. I work with schools still and parents. And I most recently started working with an integrative beauty line where we are concentrating on how we can integrate mindfulness into our skincare routine, something that women do every day. So that is kind of the short/long version of my story. And my work is really based in three main pillars. The first being it's rooted in mindfulness practices and how they can enhance the way our brains function. The second piece is neuroscience. Everything that I talk about, every practice I teach or create is rooted in how it impacts how our brains function. And then the third piece is really how we can integrate these practices into what we already do. So I'm not the sit on a cushion for 20 minutes twice a day type mindfulness guru, although if you can do that, that's amazing. But I really try to focus on short, simple practices that busy people can grab onto that can make a big difference in their lives.
Gorgeous. Yeah. And I think the example you gave about the skincare line, I think is a really wonderful example of how we can blend and just impart more presence, wisdom into things we're already doing, and the power of ritual and all that. So I love that. So wonderful. I'm excited. So where to start? If we maybe let me know if you feel there's a better place to start. But I would love to know your take on this kind of current landscape we're in, where most of us are surrounded by technology, so many different digital devices, and that's become the norm. And I actually, my husband and I was having a chat at the weekend and realized like how fast this has actually happened, and like mind-blowingly fast. Like we were looking back at because my work is so much of it's online, so many of my connections, whether that be friends, clients, podcast hosts, are kind of to do with online. I'm realizing like 15 years ago, if even maybe slightly earlier than that, like maybe 12 years ago, that just wouldn't have been the case. And I just like, wow. And it feels so normal that it's like the water we swim in, but it's so weird how that water happened so fast. It's hard to even see what it is. So I'd love your take on like that just terrain before we get into kind of what to do about it.
Sure. And you're absolutely right. It has happened so quickly. When you look at the evolution of human beings, this is such a tiny speck of dust in our history. And I think that's one of the reasons why mindfulness has become so relevant, is because our brains are not equipped to manage all that we have in front of us right now, and all of the distractions and all of the pulls on our attention. Mindfulness is about learning how to pay attention to the present moment. And oftentimes people will say, well, why is it such a big deal right now? Why do I hear the term mindfulness all the time? And I think it's a big piece is because of this digital era that we're in that we need mindfulness so desperately because we have so many pulls on our attention and so many things pulling us out of the present moment. I think that 20 years ago, a generation ago, we naturally had these windows of time for our brains to recover, to relax, to get present with the people around us, because there wasn't anything else to do.
Yeah, they weren't the distract. I mean, the TV was probably you could say that probably had maybe not as much of an effect, but I guess the TV was the precursor to this. But other than the TV, there really wasn't that same thing that was constantly hooking us.
No, not at all. And even with the TV, it was maybe 1 or 2 nights a week that there was something you were interested in watching. Often you watched it as a family.
Yeah.
Because you had one TV. So that allowed for discussion around it. Whereas now we're all retreating to our rooms with our independent devices. And that's really isolating. And there's, I don't want us to bag on technology, and technology is not going anywhere. And it allows us to do these incredible things. I am talking to you right now. You're across the ocean and we're able to have this conversation. And that's amazing. But I think we really have to be intentional about how we manage technology, how we introduce technology in our families and in our relationships, so that we can maintain those authentic relationships, so that our brains can function and develop effectively and productively. And I do think there is a way to find a balance using technology, but not letting it take over our world.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, let's just thinking if there's anything else I want to ask you. Actually, yes. From a kind of neuroscience perspective, is there anything you think would be worthwhile sharing in terms of what the effect of this, how the average person, if there is an average, is being impacted by technology use? Is there anything you can say on that from a neuroscience perspective? Because I'd just be fascinated to hear that just for my own sake.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at, if you have the widget on your phone that tells you how much screen time you have, then that's a pretty clear indication of how much time we are staring at these devices. Even kids today get over 10 hours of screen time every day. And that screen time often stimulates the survival mechanisms in our brain. So those are those fight, flight, or freeze mechanisms that flood our nervous system with chemicals, make our heart pound quickly, our breathing becomes quick and shallow, our muscles tighten. And when that happens, our prefrontal cortex, a very important part of our brain, that part of our brain shuts down. And that part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, is responsible for skills like attention, impulse control, problem solving, decision making, engaging effectively with the people around you, positive thinking. So all these incredibly important skills for our happiness, for our relationships, for our productivity. Essentially, those shut down when we're constantly being stimulated, when we're constantly trying to multitask, when we're constantly being pulled out of the present moment by these pings, dings, texts, alerts, notifications of the day's headlines and every other disaster that can come our way. All of those.
Can I ask you a quick question on that? Sorry to interrupt with that, but I'd love for you to just expand a bit on what specifically is creating that fight or flight response. Are you seeing it just any time that we're using device, or is it like specific time, social media or news headlines specifically? Would you mind just expanding a bit on those?
Yeah, absolutely. Typically it is social media is a big one. Because we often, even when we don't realize it, go into FOMO, which triggers anxiety in our brain, triggers those survival mechanisms. Notifications absolutely can trigger that. An overwhelming inbox can trigger that. And there's even been research that just the red dot, those badges that appear, can trigger anxiety.
Wow.
The reason our brain does not distinguish between life-threatening circumstances, like coming in contact with a saber-toothed tiger, which was supposed to trigger that fight or flight response, it doesn't distinguish between those situations and anything that feels unfamiliar, threatening, or annoying. So all of these things, a traffic jam, a long line at the coffee shop, an overwhelming email chain or inbox, all of those things trigger that same response, even though they're not a real threat to our survival. And the more that response is triggered, the more our brain, it strengthens that part of our brain. The more our brain uses a neural pathway, the more it likes to use that pathway. So before we know it, we have all kinds of things in our environment constantly stimulating those survival mechanisms, and our prefrontal cortex really can go dark.
Yeah. Okay, that all makes a hell of a lot of sense. And I feel as though this kind of stuff isn't actually spoken about enough. I think we either are going straight into the, I might be wrong, this is my take on it. We either go straight into the kind of like, okay, how can we limit screen use? Or we do it from a very kind of like shameful, kind of fear-based, like it's all a nightmare. And I don't think we often have these kind of, really expansive conversations about kind of, what we're actually living like, what are all the ingredients here so that we can start to make informed choices. So I'm really grateful for you taking the time just to lay all this out. It's really helpful. Okay, so what do you now suggest we do with that? Like, what are some ways that we can navigate this terrain in more healthy ways?
Sure. Well, I think it starts looking at what we do kind of internally to manage how we manage technology. So I'll start with things you can do yourself, and then I'll start with things you can specifically do to your phone or to your inbox or things like that. But it starts with, I think about how you start your day. So one of the things that often happens is people wake up to the alarm on their smartphone. They pick it up to turn off the alarm, and they're immediately drawn into those news notifications, those overnight texts, social media notifications, all of that. And instantly, those survival mechanisms in your brain are stimulated, and you start your day in a survival state. When we're in that state, we tend to be more reactive, we're impatient, we're easily distracted, we are more anxious. So all of those things get triggered, and we haven't even put our feet on the floor in the morning. So I like to think about starting my day with an alarm on my alarm clock. I walk downstairs, I set my coffee to brew. I spend about 3 minutes paying attention to my breathing while my coffee brews, it's a type of meditation that's going to stimulate my prefrontal cortex, that smart part of my brain. I spend a few minutes with a planner that I actually created called the Master Your Life Planner. I spend about 3 minutes with that, planning my day, identifying my priorities for that day, setting an intention for how I want to be in the world that day. And then I dive into my inbox, my work, all of those things. And for me, just using that 15 minutes of a morning ritual to set the tone of my day completely changes how the rest of my day goes. I start the day in a state where I am clear, I am engaged, I can be present with my kids in the morning. I have a clear plan for the day based on my priorities. And so just a simple thing like that can make a huge difference.
Oh, I love that. I love that. It's so simple, but such a, not necessarily what would occur to everyone. And I think, as you say, just right from, I feel like I've got a gold star because I do my own version similar to you, although it's different. And I think just starting from that very basic thing of like what your alarm is on can lead you in a completely, I have my alarm on one of those Lumi kind of alarm clocks that kind of gradually gets lighter before it then does the alarm. And so I was just thinking like, wow, I had never really thought the very fact that that's actually a separate alarm clock is actually really helpful as opposed to having it on my phone. So I really, such a simple tip, but actually could really change the start point of someone's day. I tend to I keep it on snooze for a while, and I, depending if my children often get up and get in bed with me, so I'll just have a couple with them. Yeah. I do a kind of 5-minute visualization, but still in my bed, and then I'll get up and start doing things. But I'm actually thinking, for me, listening to what you said there, I think I could probably delay a bit further until I pick my phone up. So there was a kind of nice delay, but I think I could probably delay it actually even more intentionally, and then kind of decide, okay, I'm now going to open my phone, but with more intention. So, but I really love that. Really, I can really see the power in like starting your day with that intention before you decide to kind of open the dragon's den, as it were.
Right. And I think you have it right. I love what you're doing. I love the snuggle time with the kids before you get out of bed. I think one thing for me that has made a big difference in the last year since I've been working with the planner has been the process of creating an intention for the day and identifying my top 3 priorities for the day.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason with the priorities is when I identify those top 3 priorities before I dive into my inbox, I'm able to identify what's most important to me to get done today, whether that may be work related, it may be personal. But if I don't do that, I will easily get sucked into, I'm picking up my phone right now, what everybody else wants from me. So the moment I go into my email, the moment I go into my text, I'm reacting to what everybody else needs. And I'm putting my own priorities to the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
So that's been huge, I feel like, for my productivity. And then the intention piece is also huge because it's something to come back to throughout the day. So my intention is different every day based on what my schedule looks like and what I have in front of me. And some days my intention will be to stay positive. Some days it will be patience will be my intention. Some days focus is my intention when I know I really need to get a lot of things done. So just being able to have that in the back of my head gives me something to come back to when I feel like I'm getting carried away by all kinds of different tasks, thoughts, and other things going on in my world.
Oh, I love that. I just was mapping over that to what I do. And within my visualization, it's kind of like quite an intuitive process, but I guess ultimately it does create that intention for the day. What I don't have is what you're talking about, that kind of those sort of 3 priorities. And so I can really see, again, having that come from my own soul, my own sense of meaning, as opposed to it being externally driven. I can really see the power in that.
Yeah, it is. It can be very powerful. But I think it doesn't just stop in the morning. I think then there's also things we can do throughout the day that allow us just to have these little brain breaks from our technology that allow our system, our kind of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system to come back into balance, allow our prefrontal cortex time to kind of rest and rejuvenate. And for me, that looks like carving out little windows where I don't have my phone.
Mm-hmm.
When I drive my kids to school in the morning, leaving my phone at home, or often we'll walk to school, leaving my phone at home. When I pick them up at the end of the day, leaving my phone at home. My husband recently has committed to, when he comes home, putting his phone away for the first 60 minutes he's in the house when he gets home from work. He then very well will return to it after dinner and get back to work or address anything that needs to be addressed. But just having that 60 minutes or 30 minutes when you walk in the door to decompress, to transition from work life to home life, and to truly engage with the people around you without your brain constantly scanning your environment for that next ping or ding that's going to pop up. That can be huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love that. It's so funny, isn't it? Again, how quickly we've adapted to having that almost what we see as a kind of, I don't know, like safety net, or it's kind of all-purpose tool of our phone. And, when you were saying, intentionally go out and leave it at home. And it's funny how that sounds quite radical in this day where we're so used to having it like, what if you break down? Or like, I was just thinking, for me, I have my shopping list on my phone because it's like a shared shopping list with my husband. And so we've created so many structures that rely on us having our phone at all times that it requires a bit of intentionality to be able to leave it at home.
It does. And I think we can all pick and choose some point where we can be away from it for a half an hour, whether it's putting in a drawer while you're having a meal with your family or leaving it at home when you walk the dog. What's the worst thing that's going to happen while you're walking the dog if you don't have your phone?
I won't be able to take a picture of the sunset.
Right? Yeah. Maybe you might miss that picture, but I think there's this idea that we have to have it all the time.
Yeah,
and we have to be constantly accessible. And what if we don't respond to that text right away? And the reality is the world is going to go on without you. And if you think that everything is so reliant on your responses that the world can't go on without your immediate response to a text notification, then I think we need to check that.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are some professions where that is true. You need to be accessible immediately. But for most of us, that client is not going to leave. The customer is not going to go away. Our kids are going to survive if we are not constantly accessible every moment of the day.
Yeah. I think that's very wise. And I think, again, it goes back to that sort of deeper intention of the kind of lives that we want to live, whether we want to live reactively and at the mercy of the outside world and other people's demands, or whether we want a life where we're sovereign and have our own sense of what we want to create. I mean, that's really foundationally where we're coming from to make those decisions.
I love that. You're right. Do you want to spend your life reacting to everyone else's wants and needs? Because that's exhausting. And not that there aren't times where you're going to be reacting. I know certainly as a mother, as a partner to someone, of course you want to be there for them. But it's true, we have to take care of ourselves so we can take care of others. And this is just another piece of self-care.
Yeah.
Of giving, it's self-care for our brains, of giving our brains a little break, keeping our prefrontal cortex working as well as it can so that we can have great relationships with the people that are right in front of us.
Yeah. I think this is such a timely and important conversation to have. I really do. Again, I can just see, because this has happened to us so fast, it's I sometimes feel in conversations with my children where, because I do think about these things deeply, it can feel as though we're out of sync with the rest of the world, where the rest of the world is like not necessarily thinking about these things and being caught up in, just have the phone on all the time or whatever it might be. And it's just making me pause again and think, this has to be a continual kind of checking in and a conversation about, this is what the world's like now. What do we choose? How do we choose to live? Because it's not going to stop. It seems right now that technology and the demands of technology are only going to grow.
Absolutely. It's definitely not stopping. And for some wonderful reasons. Like we mentioned, there's so many great things about what we are able to do with technology now. But I think you also bring up a key piece is that when we are using our devices and how we use our devices is constantly being modeled to our kids. And we are very quick, I know at least here in the United States, we're very quick to say, those teens today, they can't look you in the eye. They're so caught up in their phones. They're this, they're that. But often the parents are doing the exact same thing. They're not talking to the child that's right in front of them because they're so caught up in responding to their phone. You go to a restaurant and there's an entire family of people all looking at each of their devices. So how we use technology needs to reflect how we hope our kids will use their technology as well. Yeah. I think you need to teach kids how to use technology in the same way that you teach manners. Teach them to say please, teach them to say thank you. You teach them to put the phone down and to look someone in the eye and greet them when they walk into a room. Those are skills that have to be taught.
And taught primarily by modeling.
Yeah, absolutely. By modeling and directly. I think both. Yeah.
And I guess when I say primarily, it's like I don't think I don't think you can teach it directly without modeling.
Not effectively. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
You can say it until you're blue in the face, but if you're not modeling it, then it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Wonderful. So any other are the other kind of tips or practices or ways of kind of embedding this into our lives?
I think just a few kind of hacks in terms of what you can do actually to your devices to make them a little bit less addicting, a little bit less kind of distracting. And so some things that I've done is I turn off all badges and notifications on my phone. So instead of my phone getting my attention, I respond to those things when I want to, when I'm ready to. I check my texts at a time that I need to and I want to. I check my email. I check my social media when it makes sense for me to do so, rather than responding to that little red dot. So I think that can be a big one. Notifications also, they just pull us, they distract us. And when we try to multitask and go back and forth, that's very disruptive to our efficiency and our productivity. So we often think that we save time if I respond to that email right away. The reality is every time you switch what you're working on to respond to that email and then come back to what you're working on, you have to go back 5 or 6 steps and then catch up again. So just kind of getting you to focus on one thing at a time. Another thing is...
Yeah, so can I just quickly say the word you used there, addictive, I think we forget that, don't we? We again, because there's so much part of our lives now, we forget that kind of addictive quality of keep being pulled back. They're designed to be, and the apps within them are designed to be.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think that's something really worth remembering and having respect around. Doesn't mean we can't use them at all, but kind of again bringing that intentionality and consciousness to the fact you're using something that was actually designed to be addictive. Is I think really important.
Those little red dots are red to get your attention.
Yes, yeah, really good point. I was just thinking, I think I've got about half my notifications turned off, and then I think I've probably got another batch that aren't really that interesting to me turned on, but there's probably a couple that are interesting that I could turn off. So I'm going to go do that after this call. But I think that's a great one. Thank you.
Another easy thing to do is to move your social media apps so that they're not on the first home screen that you see. So move them over so you have to get through a couple of screens to get to them. That can prevent a little bit of the constant checking of those. Again, it's you choosing to go to those sites rather than them choosing your attention for you.
Yeah.
Utilizing things on your phone like airplane mode and do not disturb when you're trying to get deep work done, or when you are having lunch with somebody, or, anytime you can use those features, that's huge for our productivity, because our brain, even though we don't realize it, our brain knows that it doesn't have to be scanning for something that's going to interrupt. And we're able to get into that deep thinking work. We become much more productive, much more efficient by using those tools. And you can even set those tools so that certain numbers will ring through. You can set them up so that if your kids call you, that comes through. If your partner calls, that comes through, but everything else is silenced. So there's a lot we can do with our phones. And they don't come this way because they want you on them all the time. So it's actually, you have to go in and set them up this way. But there's a lot we can do to limit the distractions that our phones can create.
Yeah, that's so wise. And I think it's easy to think some of the things you're suggesting are, like you're saying, putting the social media apps a couple of screens down. And it's easy to think like, oh, why would that have an effect? But it makes so much sense. Like if you imagine, I don't know, if you had a coffee machine right there on your desk, the chances are you drink a whole lot more coffee than if you had to go to the kitchen and go make it. And so it's clear this stuff does, is with all the best intention in the world, if something's there right in front of you, you are much more likely to consume it than if it's not.
Yeah. Think of if you have a bowl full of chocolates on your desk.
Yeah. You're going to eat them.
It's pretty easy to pop one in your mouth every 10 minutes. But if I have to go, it's a really good analogy, actually. I love that.
Yeah, wonderful. Anything else? Any other? I'm loving all of this, by the way. And I love the way that you've kind of grounded this into like some bigger principles. But I think having these like simpler tips are actually really valuable.
Yeah, I think another thing that's been big for me recently, coming back to this notion of skincare, which I know you probably can't tell based on what you're seeing right now, but is we often in our skincare routine, that is a time, it's something we just get through. It's something that most women and a lot of men do every day, but it easily can fall off of our list of priorities because we get too busy, and it easily can be something we do on autopilot. But it's a very simple way to integrate a little mindfulness into your day. So if I put on a cleansing mask at night and I have to wait 3 minutes for it to dry before I rinse it off, maybe I can use that time to practice a little gratitude, to use that time to write 3 to 5 things I'm grateful for in my gratitude journal, versus pick up my phone, check my social media feed, which is going to trigger stress in my brain and all kinds of neurochemicals that are bad for my skin. So why not? Let's take this to a whole nother level. What can you do in the shower to bring that present moment awareness? There's a lot of opportunities throughout the day to get those little brain breaks, and they make a huge difference. They really do.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Really, really does make sense. And I think it's looking out for them. You've given some really great ideas, but I think even just recognizing that this has almost become, taking those kind of psychological breaks, that space is almost becoming a lost art. And to be aware that there's still opportunities to bring those back in, but probably only if we're going to look for them, only if we're going to be intentional about it.
It takes intention for sure. And don't think that you have to spend a big chunk of time. 2, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, you'll proceed through your day so much more clearly, more productively, more efficiently. So the return on the investment in time is huge.
Yeah. Wow. From a kind of neuroscience perspective, it may be that we don't yet have the data on this, but is there anything you can say in terms of, if we were to put in place all of these practices that you've been talking about, imagine like I'm your guinea pig and I'm going to go off and I'm going to do literally everything you've said, make all those changes. What would the changes be like on a neuroscience? Like what would happen in my neurology that's reflected that change of lifestyle?
Sure. So if you think about all the things, if you were to do nothing, so you were to completely ignore everything that I've said and just proceed through your day, we have all of these things in our modern lives that are triggering those mini stress responses, right? Those mini shots of adrenaline to our amygdala that triggers that fight, flight, or freeze response. Being late, getting our kids out of the house and to school on time, getting stuck in traffic, all the pings and dings on our technology, the amount of emails you need to respond to. So all of these things can constantly stack up, often without us even realizing it, constantly stimulating those alarm centers of our brain. And we end up feeling anxious, feeling impatient, feeling overwhelmed. We have difficulty sleeping at night. And so if you have these feelings, then that could be a reason you're having those feelings, is that you're constantly stimulating the alarm part of your brain. And so that's what you're responding to with those feelings. Versus as you put these practices into place, you stimulate. If you start with a breathing practice in the morning, you're stimulating your prefrontal cortex. As you practice gratitude, you're stimulating your prefrontal cortex. As you take these brain breaks from technology, you're allowing your prefrontal cortex to come back online. And you're able to respond from your prefrontal cortex is able to do the driving. You're able to pay attention to what you want to pay attention to. You're able to respond to situations thoughtfully rather than just reacting impulsively to an adversity that arises. You are able to recognize the good in your day. You're able to engage effectively with people that are right in front of you because you're coming from that prefrontal cortex, from that problem-solving, engaging, positive thinking part of your brain. So it's really about, when people talk about balancing your life or work-life balance, for me, it's a balanced brain. When my brain is balanced, I feel more balanced regardless of where I am, whether I'm at work, whether I'm at home, whether I'm parenting, whether I'm working out, whatever I'm doing. When my brain is balanced, I feel balanced.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Oh, wonderful. Is there anything else that you would like to leave listeners with in terms of, if you do one thing, make it this, or just something that you would have liked to have spoken to that you've not had the opportunity?
I think if you do one thing, give yourself 5 minutes in the morning. Think about how you start your day and how you can set the tone for your day in a way that comes from, I hate to sound like a neuroscience geek, but comes from your prefrontal cortex rather than your fight, flight, or freeze. What can you do to start your day from that part of your brain? Whether it is snuggling with your kids, a visualization, a meditation technique, a gratitude practice, whatever, some stretches or push-ups, whatever it is that you can do to spend 5 minutes stimulating that part of your brain before you get into reactive mode can make a huge difference.
Oh, wonderful. So if listeners would like to find out more about you and your amazing work, where's the best place for them to go?
Sure. The easiest place to go, ironically, is on your phone. But only go there when you want to. But that would be to follow me. I'm Dr. Kristen Race on Instagram. My website is kristenrace.com, and that has all kinds of information about how to bring me in for speaking engagements, how to purchase a Master Your Life Planner. I have a children's book and a parenting book on there if you're interested in teaching these skills to young kids. And then also, if you're curious about this work with Solvasa Beauty, Solvasa.com is another great place to go to learn more about how you can integrate some mindfulness into your everyday skincare routine.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been really, actually far more deep and interesting than I was expecting. I thought it was going to be useful, but it's actually been much more fascinating than I thought it might be. So thank you so much for making it so.
Thanks, Leanne. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
Wasn't that a helpful show? Here are my main takeaways. We're living in a terrain filled with tech that's utterly unrecognizable to how our ancestors lived, even the closest generations to us. We haven't evolved for this constant stimulus provided by the digital era, and we now have the choice of how to respond to it. Using tech often triggers a flight or fight response, which means our prefrontal cortex is deactivated. That's the center of yummy things like connection and problem solving and attention. So it's an area of the brain that most of us would really choose to use more. What choices will you make that allow you to create rather than react? Some of the ideas that Kristen suggested are using an alarm clock instead of a phone. Have at least 5 minutes offline when you first wake up, and you could begin your day with something like breath work, meditation, visualization, movement, or snuggling up. And take breaks throughout the day when your phone is put away or on airplane mode. And lastly, turn off notifications and move social media across a screen or two. So fantastic, really practical ideas and suggestions there. So if you'd like to get notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 272. And if you are feeling the call and like to discover more about waking the wild masculine, just go along to primalhappiness.co/WTWM to find out more and let us know. If you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit subscribe. That way you'll get each episode automatically and magically to your device as soon as it's released, and make sure you've turned your notifications off. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.